You really can't talk about William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe without at least considering the subject of plagiarism. I'm going to deal with plagiarism down through the ages for just a few moments here, but I promise I'll get back to the subject of Kit and Will very soon. Almost every writer throughout history has borrowed ideas, taken advice and suggestions from friends, fellow writers, and even fans, or has been ghostwritten and edited to the point of unrecognizability. The cast of the 1970 film MASH, under the direction of Robert Altman, improvised so much of the dialogue in the film that Gary Berghoff, who played Radar in both the film and TV series, once said there was almost nothing of Ring Lardner Jr.'s screenplay dialogue left in the film. Yet Lardner Jr. won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. When David O. Selznick tried to turn the epic book Gone with the Wind into a film, he had a horrible time finding a screenplay he believed captured the full flavor and meaning of the book, while omitting the glorification of the Ku Klux Klan and yet showing the racism and the true horror of slavery. At the same time, he wanted to show the dignity, strength, character, and courage of the black slaves. He succeeded brilliantly in this last effort by casting the incredible Hattie McDaniel to play the feisty and steadfast Mammy, who stole every scene she was in with her brilliance, thereby winning the Best Supporting Actress Oscar.
It's Mr. Red I was worried about. He done lost his mind these last couple of days.
Oh, no, Mammy, no.
I ain't never seen no man, black or white, sit store on any child. When Dr. Meade say her neck broke, Mr. Red grabbed his gun and run out there and shoot that poor pony. And for a minute, I think he going to shoot himself.
She was the first African American ever to win an Oscar and opened doors throughout Hollywood for her fellow black actors. Selznick believed he was taking baby steps in fighting racism, but she turned his baby steps into a giant leap. A beautiful moment in time, perhaps, but not the trail I was following. People who know me know how much I like to dart about in conversation from one story to the next. It's very annoying, I'm sure. Must focus. I was talking about writers whose work is changed, stolen, or edited into something else entirely. The screenplay Selznick started production with was written by Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Sidney Coe Howard. Many other writers had written and submitted adaptations of the book, including playwright John Van Druten, who wrote I Remember Mama and Bell, Book and Candle, Joe Swirling, who wrote Guys and Dolls, and reportedly even F. Scott Fitzgerald, author of The Great Gatsby and Tender is the Night. It's hard to imagine, with Selznick in possession of half a dozen or more at least partially completed screenplays, that Howard would not have read them and had the benefit of the best ideas from them. Even so, principal photography begun while using the Howard screenplay was soon halted by Selznick, who took a huge financial loss, idling his cast and crew for a couple of weeks while the screenplay was again rewritten. He made the decision to stop production after looking at a number of the daily rushes. He was thoroughly disappointed with the screenplay, that he felt left out so much rich nuance, the social significance of the passing of the age, and the horrors of the Civil War, all for the sake of cutting the running time. The screenplay had a number of ghostwriters both before and during filming, none of them screen credited, of course, and all of whom had an impact on Howard's screenplay. The story persists that none of the ghostwriters had the impact on the script that Oscar winner Ben Hecht did. Hecht, who wrote Notorious, His Girl Friday, Wuthering Heights, and Spellbound, was a prolific writer of books, plays, and screenplays. Apparently, Hecht came in and, working non-stop directly with his good friend David Selznick, completely revamped the script, allowing filming to go forward. Despite all the many writers whose words and ideas comprise the completed screenplay, some of whom made major contributions, Sidney Howard was the only credited screenwriter, and it was he who won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay, posthumously. Howard was crushed by a tractor on his farm in August 1939, 4 months before the film's premiere, and he never lived to see the film he probably would have had a hard time recognizing. The earliest playwrights we know of, the ancient Greeks, were known even in those seminal days of playwriting to borrow ideas, even steal outright from one another. The very first known actor in history, also known as the father of tragedy, was Thespis. He was the first man to play a character on stage. He basically invented theater, and all the playwrights and actors from those days to this are heirs to his legacy. He was credited historically with having written several plays, but most are now attributed to the philosopher Heraclitus Ponticus. Who wrote Prometheus Bound? We were always taught that Aeschylus did. Aeschylus, a contemporary of fellow tragedians Sophocles and Euripides, the three greatest ancient Greek playwrights, is oddly also called the father of tragedy. Since Thespis was called the father of tragedy, I assume he was the father of presenting tragedies, and Aeschylus the father of writing tragedies. Many believe Phrynichus, a pupil of Thespis, is the real father of tragedy, so I just don't know anymore. To paraphrase a friend, tragedy must have a lot of phone calls to make on Father's Day. In recent years, a growing belief seems to be that not Aeschylus, but his son Euphorion wrote Prometheus Bound. First, in basic terms, Euphorion in his writings did not show as much deference to the gods as his father, and in Prometheus Bound, the playwright is pretty hard on old Zeus. Secondly, there are a few references in the play to material believed not written until after Aeschylus' death. I guess, since we don't have enough facts here, you can pick your guy, but at the moment Aeschylus is still credited for the play. The other two parts of the Bound Unbound trilogy have been partially, or mostly lost, so they're not much help providing clues to authorship. One other funny story about Aeschylus, and it wasn't funny to him, it's only funny to us. The story goes that Aeschylus died when an eagle mistook his bald head for a rock and dropped a turtle on it. That's right, he was killed by a falling turtle. Have you ever heard of a death like that? It's hysterical. There have been a great many improvements in plagiarism software in recent years, so someday we'll be better able to answer the mysteries of authorship and plagiarism. But the greatest question of all has never been answered to date, and it's a doozy. Did Christopher Marlowe write any or all of Shakespeare's plays? Personally, I don't think so, but let's take a look. As you know, most of the finest literary scholars in the last 100 years have not been able to solve this riddle. I have appeared in exactly one Shakespeare play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. I appeared in 2 roles in it, as Demetrius and Flute the Bellows Mender. I have appeared in only one Marlowe play, Faustus, while I was in college. I was blessed to play Mephistopheles. So being the expert that I am, I will now proceed to completely fail to answer that age-old question. But it may take me a while to do it. Keep in mind I have only the accumulated knowledge and theories of others to rely on, so when I'm done bloviating on this subject, remember I am standing on the shoulders of the giants of bloviation, and I defer to their argumentative but not definitive research to exonerate myself and deflect all criticism elsewhere. To begin, realize that the best minds of history and English literature cannot even agree exactly how Marlowe died. The earliest prevailing theory, one that was used in the film Shakespeare in Love, a fantastic film by the way, was that Marlowe was killed in a drunken tavern fight with one of his companions in a dispute over the bill. So basically, check please, and clang, the fight is on. In that version, Marlowe inadvertently and clumsily killed himself, catching himself in the eye with his own knife. Not likely. Firstly, they were in a boarding house, not a tavern. It was a respectable place operated by Dame Eleanor Bull, who occasionally rented it out for gatherings of the kind that Marlowe, Ingram Fraser, Nicholas Scarries, and Robert Poley were having for 10 hours that day. Additionally, Marlowe was an experienced brawler. And if you look at his inquest, the verdict was that Fraser, the man Marlowe was fighting with, struck the fatal blow into Marlowe's skull just above the eye with his own knife in self-defense. Normally that would be case closed. But were the deaths of Elvis, JFK, Billy the Kid, and Jesse James accepted as facts by everyone? There are several theories about Marlowe's death. that have gained credence in recent years. They all involve atheism, spying for the crown, or simply murder. Either Marlowe died in Dame Bull's salon on May 30th, 1593, or he didn't. So here are some brief arguments. Knowing me, what are the odds of brevity? If Marlowe was actually killed that day, theory 1. It happened just like the inquest ruled. Marlowe got into an argument with Fraser over a debt he owed him. Marlowe became enraged and grabbed Fraser's knife. Fraser regained the knife and plunged it into Marlowe's skull in self-defense. Theory 2. Marlowe was assassinated to shut him up. It is almost certain that Marlowe was an active and quite effective secret agent for the Crown. He missed a lot of time at Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, giving few answers when asked why. The school was refusing to grant him his advanced master's degree when the Crown intervened and basically said, he's been on assignments for us for the good of the country, so give him the degree. Thus all but saying flatly that Marlowe was a spy. He was working directly for Elizabeth's chief spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, and was a close friend and confidant of Thomas Walsingham, cousin to Sir Francis, and himself a known spymaster. Just before Marlowe's death, he was arrested at Thomas Walsingham's home and charged with being an atheist and attempting to convert others to atheism. That charge carried the death penalty. Oddly, he was released from prison on his own recognizance to await trial, something basically unheard of. But some powerful people who had much to hide could reasonably surmise that Marlowe, facing eventual torture and death as heretics always did, might reveal their secrets under interrogation. Aside from the spying and an intimate knowledge of illegal acts carried out in the name of recently deceased Sir Francis Walsingham, or in the Queen's name, it is widely believed that Marlowe was a homosexual, and one of his many lovers was Thomas Walsingham. We know that Thomas Walsingham's wife despised Marlowe and openly talked of that hatred. So in answer to the question of why would someone want to murder a man who, in short order, would be executed anyway, the answer is to ensure he would take whatever he knew to the grave with him. Also, being so closely associated with the known atheists was problematic for anyone with a reputation to protect. Some believe Elizabeth herself gave the order. She was at Nonsuch in Surrey, just 10 miles away from Dame Bull's boarding house in Deptford, when Marlowe died. Coincidentally, the royal coroner was at Nonsuch as well. The meeting of the 4 men at Dame Eleanor's lasted 10 hours. This has always been a mystery. Why so long? Dame Eleanor's home is widely believed to have been a safe house for the Crown's secret agents. But suppose you needed the Queen's go-ahead before killing Marlowe. Once he arrived, you could have sent a message to the Queen that you had him. 10 hours would easily be enough time to get the message to Elizabeth and for her to send orders back to the 3 assassins. Also, since the Queen was within the legal verge of 12 miles, the royal coroner would have been required by law to take control of the inquest, thereby assuring the proper outcome. Also, the Queen very hastily pardoned Ingram Fraser, Thomas Walsingham's trusted servant, which would very nicely have tied a bow on the whole affair if the Queen had ordered Marlowe's death on that day in May 1593. If Marlowe wasn't killed that day, Theory 1. He faked his own death and wrote no more. Here's how the theory goes. Marlowe, with the help of his friends, many of them wealthy and powerful, faked his own death to avoid prosecution, torture, and execution for atheism. The coroner's inquest was sloppily handled, and that could have been intentional. Marlowe then disappeared from history, either assuming a new identity as a deep-cover overseas operative for Elizabeth, or perhaps just starting a new life in the countryside or abroad. Marlowe had a close friend, fellow playwright Thomas Nash, who is believed to have also faked his death to avoid a similar prosecution, and then assumed the name Thomas Dekker. Quite a coincidence. Theory 2. Marlowe faked his death and continued to write as William Shakespeare. Many believe Marlowe wrote most or all of the works of William Shakespeare. In this theory, Marlowe lived in exile abroad and wrote plays using Shakespeare as a frontman. There are a lot of holes in this theory. For one, Marlowe was a lousy comedy writer. He had no head for it. To patch this hole, others have speculated that Marlowe may have collaborated with Thomas Nash Dekker on the comedies. Nash was best known as a gifted writer of comedies, though his work was so bawdy it was offensive to many. With Marlowe to construct the plot and keep Nash in line, they say, it could have worked. It is believed Marlowe and Nash had collaborated on other projects before they both died. Of course, Marlowe could more easily have collaborated with Shakespeare himself, if not for the distance between them. Theory 3. Marlowe was Shakespeare. This one would have been the most tricky to pull off. After faking his death, as the theory goes, Marlowe assumed a new identity. We know that Shakespeare had a history, the life he led before Marlowe died. He was married to Anne Hathaway and had 3 children. A document trail exists. However, he and Marlowe were born just 2 months apart. Logically, instead of Marlowe assuming Shakespeare's identity, the Marlowe was Shakespeare theory would actually work better the other way around. Perhaps Shakespeare was Marlowe. Suppose Shakespeare assumed the identity of Marlowe while serving the Queen in her secret service. Once he, for whatever reason, had outlived his usefulness to the crown, they killed the alter ego Marlowe, and Shakespeare resumed his real life. In fact, it makes a lot of sense because there are a number of years of Shakespeare's life that we know almost nothing about. After Marlowe's death, he had a considerable career as an actor, writer, and acting company owner. In short, he was prominent. Marlowe, in assuming a new identity, would have wanted to keep a low profile. Also, Master Shakespeare was well known to the Queen, so unless the Queen was a conspirator in Marlowe's fake death, he would have had great difficulty passing himself off to her as Shakespeare. Shakespeare was not well known for much of his early life in the theater, so if those who knew him while he lived as Marlowe kept quiet, and don't forget, even if some firmly believed Shakespeare was Marlowe, the Crown itself had declared Marlowe to be dead and had pardoned his killer. Going against the Crown in such matters could be fatal, and as it was widely known that Marlowe was dead, all Shakespeare would have had to do was change his look a bit and moderate his habits. If anyone said he looked like Kit Marlowe, all he would have to say is, I get that a lot. Still, looking at the pictures of the two men, there was a certain resemblance. The point is, there is so much borrowing, emulation, and outright stealing among artists and writers that it's impossible to tell who gets the credit. For example, there is no doubt that Shakespeare looked to Marlowe for inspiration. John Bakeless tells us in his book Christopher Marlowe, The Man in His Time, Marlowe, in The Jew of Malta, wrote, "But soft, what star shines yonder in the east? The lodestar of my life, if Abigail." Shakespeare wrote in Romeo and Juliet, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." Marlowe wrote, "A fair young maid, scarce 14 years of age, the sweetest flower in Cytherea's field." Shakespeare wrote, "Death lies upon her like an untimely frost upon the sweetest flower of all the field." So Shakespeare looked to Marlowe for inspiration. Marlowe looked to Nash and to others, even conceivably to Shakespeare. Playwrights have been lifting characters, plot ideas, and dialogue from one another since Thespis trod the stage. Jackson Browne wrote a song called "For a Dancer." It was at least partly about this very subject. It goes like this. Just do the steps that you've been shown by everyone you've ever known until the dance becomes your very own. No matter how close to yours another's steps have grown. In the end, there is one dance you'll do alone. It's okay to absorb the best ideas from others, preferably while giving them credit for it as you make your way through the world. But in so doing, look to the best and brightest society has to offer. Marlowe and Shakespeare, however they did it, were just doing the steps the way they were shown, while adding a great many new flourishes. Now it's your turn. Add your light to the sum of light. I borrowed that from Leo Tolstoy. Like Chris and the Bard, teach the steps to others and let your dance be your legacy. For Robert's Ramblings, I'm Robert Troll. Thank you for watching, and come on back.